Some men are convinced that the value of ideas rests solely in those who communicate them, as opposed to in the ideas themselves. And this mentality, my friends, that leads to a bad civic posture and also leads to the decay of civilization because it places an artificial limit on the minds of men. And it is this mentality that is on full display in the response to the Tucker Carlson Nick Fuentes interview. In order to deal with any issue, including one as controversial and divisive as this, thinking people must put aside personalities and inquire into ideas and their implications. But those who insist on gatekeeping, alienating people who have different views, even ill-thought views, shaming people, and all of these other tactics cannot possibly get us to any closer to the truth, and they can only get us to a place where antagonism and ill will are bred in the American society. And this, my friends, will not actually help us entertain the substance that builds and sustains civilization. So in this video, my friends, we will be going over why I believe gatekeeping for this very reason is actually a fundamental act of moral cowardice. We will be explaining also how this gatekeeping conversation feeds directly into the spectacle of personality, which is atrophying the minds of so many political observers. And I'll provide a roadmap for all of us to deal with the problems that plague American civil society and also the personalities that arise from those problems. But before we do that, my friends, hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Watts. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bit, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can, my friends, to ensure that our message and our channel is successful. My friends, this is a civic conservative project. If you believe the fundamental philosophical character of the American founding is worth preserving and pushing forth into the public conversation, this channel is for you. If you believe America needs defenders who not only have moral rigor, but also philosophical rigor and clarity to battle against the lies and the ill will of her aggressors in the public square, then of course, this channel is for you as well. Like, share, comment, subscribe, my friends. Thank you guys so much for being here. And now please enjoy the video. Before I proceed, let me just make one thing clear. Because unfortunately, I've been seeing a mentality in the political conversation for as long as I've been observing it for years that has been deeply troubling my spirit. And it's that great minds don't talk about people. Great minds talk about ideas. Small minds talk about people. But unfortunately, the only way for a small mind to latch onto an idea or get close to an idea is by obsessing over a person who it may be associated with. But those small minds are actually limiting themselves because everyone has the ability to think beyond their comfort zone, but very few folks will. And unfortunately, the fact that so many people are refusing to think beyond their comfort zone actually defines why this conversation over Tucker Carlson's recent interview has become so tortured, so manic, and so frazzled. And so, as I mentioned, there has been a lot of conversation about gatekeeping, particularly. There's a lot of conversation about, for example, people like Nick Fuentes not being platformed by conservatives and them being kicked out of the conservative movement or whatever.
Hitler admirers, Stalin admirers, Jew haters, American haters, Churchill haters. You're damn right we're going to cancel them and deplatform them. It's called the market system.
And there have been people saying that the fact that Tucker Carlson interviewed someone of Mr. Fuentes' ilk demonstrates that their attempts to gatekeep him from the conservative movement have actually failed. And we should all take this as a time to ring the alarm and to panic and to abandon the infrastructure of the right or all these other kinds of things. And there are a lot of other people who are demanding, for example, wholesale condemnation of people like Mr. Fuentes. Many of you may remember, but recently the president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts, made a video where he condemned antisemitism and he also condemned hatred, but he also said he's not going to target Tucker Carlson simply because he did something that people find objectionable. And to this, there has been a wave of retribution, a wave of anger, people resigning from their posts at Heritage, all this kind of stuff. But actually, if you look beyond detail one, Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes are not important here. What did I just say? Great minds talk about ideas, and small minds talk about people. It is this posture that gatekeeping foments within the citizenry that is actually the real problem here. Because gatekeeping keeps us away from solving the source of a lot of what we're seeing in the discourse. Gatekeeping prevents us from evaluating and understanding the moral preconditions that bring rise to personalities that reflect an unhealthy culture or reflect ill thoughts within an unhealthy culture. A lot of people would either condemn Mr. Carlson or condemn Mr. Fuentes without asking the question, what are the moral and civic preconditions that actually make it possible for someone like Fuentes to have as big of a platform as he does right now? And in order to ask that question, you have to detach yourself from the personality and you have to investigate ideas. You have to embrace a spirit of inquiry and investigation and then reflection. But so many people are not wanting to do that because they are in a gatekeeper mentality. And this is my first problem. A lot of folks are saying that gatekeeping, when it comes to bad ideologies, is actually an example of moral clarity. And that single utterance, this moral clarity, it makes me so disgusted because it does not even understand what the essence of moral clarity, what it requires to actually have moral clarity in the hearts of the citizenry. Gatekeeping is actually moral cowardice, and therefore it's moral mystery because it actually obscures things by locking them behind a gate, as opposed to being moral clarity. Because gatekeeping simply rests upon two principles: alienation, that is keeping out people who you do not want in a particular area or movement out, and then condemnation, doing so to the detriment of their public image. While alienation and condemnation only produce short-term ill will within the hearts of the gatekeeper and his adherents and those who are being gatekept or condemned, it does not produce reflection. And the first requirement for moral clarity of any kind is reflection. Because reflection, my friends, asks us to think about our beliefs, think about the matter before us. Then we inquire. When we inquire, my friends, we actually dig deeper into the matter and consider its implications in reality. Then we apply those implications to the observable world around us and see how they manifest and their effects. But then this triggers a character transformation within us, my friends, where after we've applied those things to the observable world, we now have to ask ourselves, how do these effects fit in with my actions? How do these effects fit in with my role as a citizen, with my role as a moral agent? Because as a citizen, you're not simply someone who bears a legal mark upon your name. You are someone who has fundamentally a moral role in society, to have fidelity to your fellow man, to have loyalty to your fellow society, and to proceed with conscientiousness and with truth and with justice. So not only is a citizen legal, he's also moral as well. And then that interrogation transforms your conduct, because someone who reflects, inquires, investigates, applies, and then looks at himself, there will be a change of conduct which makes their thoughts and makes their heart all the more better. A culture of the heart and a culture of the mind, both mired in virtue, are birthed from this process. Gatekeeping makes this impossible, because gatekeeping stops it at the beginning and does not let us get through the process of reflection or inquiry. Gatekeeping makes someone, there's no problem with it, the gatekeeper is an opponent of persons as opposed to being an evaluator of ideas, which then means the gatekeeper can only do one thing and one thing only, my friend. He can only antagonize. And antagonism is the opposite of what brings civil society together. Antagonism is the opposite principle of what actually sustains and fuels a civilization. Antagonism brings forth conflict, and conflict can only bring forth moments of temporary victory for one side, but ultimately it brings forth ruin. Civilization and social cooperation on the ground level is sustained by mutual cooperation between two parties, even parties who do not agree with each other, even those who may not even recognize the validity of one's worldview or not. It is that being able to overcome those differences and come together for a common aim that produces the possibility for society at all. This does not mean that conflict does not happen. This means that conflict is not conflict in the most brutal sense. Conflict becomes tension. And existing amid tension is the story of the American experiment. Existing amid tension is what happened to our founding fathers when they set off to found this nation as a rebuke to the divine right of kings and to royal absolutism in the 18th century. Existing amid tension is what actually helps us refine ourselves morally and civically. So we need not get rid of conflict entirely, but conflict must be framed within the terms and the principles of civil society. Why am I going on this whole thing? Because gatekeeping makes it impossible for us to do any of this. And it instead deputizes us to be soldiers in a war, an endless war in society against those who we do not wish to confront, whose ideas we do not wish to confront, but whose personalities we are stuck to. And this is the second problem with gatekeeping. Gatekeeping, my friends, keeps us bound up in what I call the spectacle of personality. Just to put it very simply, the spectacle of personality is when the flair, the flair and drama generated by particular people within the conversation becomes the standard by which we understand ideas and the standards by which we observe the world. This is obviously quite dangerous because it limits our understanding of the truth to particular persons. That's number one. So we can't understand the truth for itself. We can only understand the truth as it relates to a particular person. And if you are letting a single person be your whole understanding of the truth, you will never understand the truth. And instead, you're letting that person then enslave your mind and take you wherever they want to take you. So if you, for example, have a vested interest in understanding a particular topic, and there's one personality who you just love to hear from, and you don't go beyond them in searching that particular topic, if that personality gets into a drama with another personality, you will then feel a vested stake in joining that personality in some way, shape, or form in that drama, because you now have an emotional relationship, an intellectual, emotional connection with that person, and you can be dragged all around. And this is the spectacle of personality. This is why when influencers fight, you see so much drama on so many different sides, because it's such a spectacle and it's such a gravitational force that people who bind themselves to persons over ideas feel. But the man who evaluates ideas over being bound to persons is actually able to endure that process I talked about, understand where those ideas fit in the whole world, understand how we relate to them as people, and then apply them to refining our conduct as moral agents. But gatekeeping rests on condemnation. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, we got to condemn Nick Fuentes or condemn Tucker Carlson." It's much easier, my friends. When you get the right civic posture, where reflection and inquiry become your standard, as opposed to condemnation and antagonism, you will actually realize that we don't condemn persons; we confront ideas. Condemnation relies on two philosophical elements, my friends. It relies on a move of passion first. I condemn them. And it also relies on a brief utterance directed towards the detriment of the person that you are trying to condemn. This does not build anything. This simply tries to tear down something. Whereas inquiry asks difficult questions, then explores the implications of those questions, then applies their meaning to the observable world, this process I mentioned before, that attempts to create something practical from these insights, because man cannot subsist off of idle or impractical knowledge, as Joseph Butler, the philosopher, tells us. And then it forms a character within ourselves. This is tough work. This is gritty work. This is not as flashy as attacking someone that you dislike in the public discourse. But this is the work that builds civilizations, and this is the work that repairs disordered consciences, which then leads me to the conversation about antisemitism and exclusion and all this kind of stuff. My friends, what kind of world do hateful and ill-filled ideas flourish under? A world where condemnation is the standard, or the world where inquiry and reflection are the standard? When you condemn, you separate someone from the whole society, and you put them in a place where they are for temporarily alone, but then they are surrounded by others who are condemned. And then they can create their own meaning amongst each other, with that fueled by that resentment and that envy produced from that alienation. In any social context fueled from the vicious principles of man's nature, envy, resentment, revenge, is a social context that will ultimately harm the whole civil society when it rears its ugly head once again. But in a society of reflection and inquiry, not only are we able to understand those ill-filled ideas, understand where they come from, we can also understand why they rest upon the hearts of so many people at a particular time, and then speak wisdom to those people wisdom that those people especially need. Tying it all back to this controversy, my friends, it is rather odd that so many people are willing to point fingers and condemn when that brings nothing, no edification, and only ruin and only separation. It's so odd that people are willing to point fingers and condemn persons when sometimes persons are simply misguided. And persons are unfortunately affected by their conscience not being well formed, or persons are affected by some kind of environmental factor that puts their thinking in a poor way. There are three dimensions of citizenship, my friends. There's the moral, there's the civic, and then there's the political. But the moral requires that we all have a certain posture. The civic requires that we apply that posture in our society. And the political then requires that posture in that application affects how laws are made. But if the moral is disrupted, then we can't have any hope of having a strong civic posture within society. As members of society, we have a moral duty to veracity, which is the pursuit of truth. And then that moral duty then binds us to charitability, which is being able to see hints of truth and also being able to see hints of falsehood in the perspectives of those whom you may not particularly like. And that requires us then on a basic moral level to see beyond personalities and see into the anatomy of ideas, and then to proceed from that point. But the spectacle of personality and all of the drama around this interview especially, unfortunately, is preventing us from fulfilling one of our basic moral duties and getting us mucked up and dragged down into the nonsense of spectacle rather than getting us delving and excavating into the substance of civilization. It is woefully unwise to shut off the wisdom of the conservative from those who need it the most. It is woefully unwise to condemn someone like Nick Fuentes or condemn someone like the Grapers or whoever you want to condemn. I don't care who they are. When in all reality, it produces nothing except this ritualistic condemnation, this sort of self-serving dopamine feeling within yourself, this sort of mistaking passion for virtue, which does not actually create a better moral culture in society, does not actually create a better society. It merely creates enemies and tribes and groups within societies. Why not simply, my friends, confront the idea of antisemitism, confront the idea of any ill-formed idea, any kind of hatred, any kind of revenge. Confront it. Demonstrate its errors. Also demonstrate anything that it may have that makes it seem plausible. And then pose a positive alternative, rooted in goodwill, rooted in charitability, rooted in the moral truths of man's nature that will help chip away at those resentful ideas. That is how you actually build societies. That is how you actually build conscience. And the conservative especially is bound to prudence. And in being bound to prudence, the conservative has to consider exactly how his actions and how his behaviors erode or build the society around him. And one led by prudence would necessarily be more compelled to go ahead and talk to those they disagree with, go ahead and reach those they disagree with, than shut them off and put them away into this sea of uncharitability. True virtue, my friends, is found in reckoning with what makes you uncomfortable, reckoning with what challenges your conscience, and then bringing that to heel with what we know to be true by looking at the world around us and understanding the natural truths of humanity. If you're a graper, or if you're anti-Semitic, if you're anything like that, I don't condemn you. I simply want to show you a different path. Because that's what I believe is actually going to help you and help America become a stronger person, become more well-ordered people, and also know the error of your ways. And a movement that thrives off of exclusion, as opposed to cautious inquiry and investigation, is not a movement that can sustain a civilization, but a movement that confronts even the ideas that make us uncomfortable, even the ideas that make us feel nasty, even the ideas that trigger our passions, and then can talk about those ideas in a dispassionate way, in a way that conforms to the dignity of all persons, in a way that is charitable. That's a movement, my friend, that not only can build up civilization, that's a movement that can help correct some of the fissures that form in the cracks of society when bad ideas go unchallenged and when personalities begin to reflect those bad ideas. This is not about Tucker Carlson. In fact, I frankly have no strong opinions about Tucker Carlson or anyone else. My goal as an American, as a thinker, is to help our country become stronger, and we won't do that through alienation. we can only do it through inquiry. So what path do you embrace, my friends? Do you embrace the path of alienation and condemnation and moral self-righteousness and pointing fingers? Or do you embrace the path of inquiry, investigation, and a rigorous, charitable confrontation of ideas, good and bad, so we can suss out their implications in the world and then build a more positive world going forward? That's the path I embrace. That's the path America was built upon. I most certainly hope all of you will embrace that same path with me. This is not an endorsement of bad ideas. This is an acknowledgement of the need to confront them by understanding them, understanding how they form a culture of the heart in certain people, and then addressing that, as opposed to obsessing over personalities and all these different things. That is a dead end that will get us nowhere except into circular firing squads that does not benefit conservatism and also does not benefit this country. So stop worrying about Nick Fuentes. Stop worrying about Tucker Carlson. Stop worrying about all these different things. And instead ask yourself the question, what are the preconditions that bring all this to light? And what is my role in confronting them? That is a much more productive conversation, my friends. My friends, study history, study philosophy. If what you heard today inspired you and made you want to, again, understand the ideas that constitute America and the thinkers, both well-known and unknown, that helped bring them forth, please be sure to join the Pensive cohort. You can do that by joining my Discord. It's my army of young thinkers who are going to go ahead, study these philosophers, study these thinkers, and then push their ideas into the public sphere. My friends, be sure to donate to me as well if you wish to help me continue to bring content to you. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.